Okay, today we're picking up with the Qin Dynasty. Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi is the emperor that starts the Qin Dynasty. And this is where the tradition of the emperor is going to start, where the emperor is in charge of everything. He's the centralizing authority. Administrative districts are going to help him out, but for the most part, Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi is going to be in charge. So in order to make sure that he stays in charge and that there's no rival families that are going to take over from him, he is going to confiscate the weapons and armor from his enemies, and he will have it melted down into bells or into statues, non-military things, in order to prevent anybody from kind of taking over. It's during the Qin Dynasty that the Chinese will standardize weights and measures, and that the language will be developed into what is now modern Chinese. The Great Wall will continue construction. It's a 1,500-mile long wall that is created. It was started by the Zhou Dynasty, but it will be improved by the Qin Dynasty. So it's kind of a product of both dynasties. The followers of the emperor are pro-legalist. Remember, legalist was very strict punishment for disobedience, but they're also anti-Confucian. And so they kill the followers of Confucius and they burn his books. Strict law, strict punishment is the way of the land. The army of China under the Qin Dynasty is going to be called the Wild Beasts of China because they had very brutal discipline. They were very intolerant and all kinds of stuff. Eventually, the emperor becomes obsessed about being assassinated and achieving an immortal life. He wants to be immortal. He wants to live forever. And so he's going to employ magicians to try and give him potions that will give him eternal life. He also will create what's called the Terracotta Army. In order, it's about a 6,000 member army that will watch over him and protect him. So these magicians are giving him potions in order to give him eternal life, and he eventually is killed by one of them from a poisoned potion. And so we see this huge revolt take place with peasants and nobles and everybody trying to figure out who's going to be the next emperor. And so we get the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty is led by Emperor Liu Bang. He was a prison guard for the previous emperor, and so he's going to create an army from the prisoners. He lets them free as long as they fight for him, and so he's got this built-in army already. Basically, anybody who opposes him, he gives them a choice. You can be appointed to a job and work for me, or you can be executed. Well, vast majority of them all work for him. Chaos will ensue, and when Liu Bang dies, and we have a rebellion that will take place for about 40 years. And then we get Emperor Wu Ti, and he's going to break the power of the nobles, and he ends this concept of primogeniture. And primogeniture is where just the firstborn, primo, right? The firstborn child gets everything, and if you have any siblings, they're all screwed. They don't get anything. And so he's going to end that and say, well, if you have 5 children, they all get some. It doesn't just go to the oldest. Emperor Wu Ti was a Confucianist, and he's going to strengthen the exams for the inspectors. He creates exams at the local, provincial, and national level, and you have to pass the exam to get the job at that level. So if you just wanted to be a local inspector, you just had to pass the local inspector test. If you wanted to be a national inspector, you had to pass all 3 of those tests to work your way up. Emperor Wu Ti will create several alliances with countries around him, and he will create what's called the Silk Road, which is a network of highways. And it's very important because it connects China with the rest of the world, especially through trade. And so the rest of the world begins to have knowledge of China. Towards the end of his reign, he becomes senile, which means a little out of his head. And at his death, we see a lot of corruption because he gave a lot of things to his favored concubine, and she takes advantage of that quite a bit. The Han middle period will come around with advisor Wang Mang, and he was a radical advisor to the child emperor. So Emperor Wu Ti dies, and he leaves behind a son, a very young son, and so the son has an advisor who's going to help him out. Well, his advisor was this Confucian scholar named Wang Mang, and he decides, well, I've got this influence right now, so I'm going to try this financial experiment. And so he will redistribute the land from the rich to the poor, kind of like a Robin Hood sort of thing, taking things from the rich and giving them to the poor. He also is going to attack the monopolies on salt and wine and on money lending and try to keep their prices reasonable. Well, there's a lot of resentment about these policies, and there's going to be a huge rebellion. The Red Eyebrows is the name of the rebel group because they paint their eyebrows red. And they are going to go against not just the emperor, but also the advisor. They are going to be successful, and the riches and victories that they have on the border is going to allow China to expand, and they go back to primogeniture where only the oldest gets stuff. But the court itself, or the emperor's court, is going to go into this decay because the widows and the concubines tend to have a lot more power than they would normally have because they have this influence over this very, very young emperor, child emperor. And so all the problems that are going on in China at this time are going to be blamed on the women, that they were evil and they caused these problems and they're not able to control government, so they shouldn't even have a say, kind of thing. So then we get the Zhang family. They're called the Yellow Turbans because they wear a yellow headdress. And they're a rebel group, and they're also a contender for power. They also want to be in charge. They're considered kind of eccentric, kind of out there, because they believe they found the way to cure all disease, which was to drink pure water. So you boil it first, and then you drink the water. And today we know it's exactly what you need to do. You boil your water so you get rid of all the parasites and junk that lives in it, and you won't have disease. Back then they were like, this is crazy people kind of thing. So anyway, but the Zhang family takes control, and in the middle of the Han period they take control, and they have some achievements. They improve on the calendar, and they create paper and a printing press and all kinds of stuff. But again, there's more than just this one group that wants power, and so they kind of fight back and forth, and you get this period called the Six Dynasties. And the Six Dynasties is where you have 6 emperors. So I'm sure you can imagine the chaos that was involved in this, but there are 6 emperors who are vying for power over China. And some of them were Confucian emperors, and some of them were Buddhist emperors. So Buddhism begins to trickle in from India into China because of the Silk Road, because of the trade that's going on. So the Confucian emperors were not seen as being very good people. The Confucian ones didn't, they wore these very long silk robes, like the sleeves went all the way down to the ground, and they would grow their fingernails out super long, and they would curl around. It was kind of gross. But the reason they did this was to symbolize that they didn't have to work. You know, they're more of a thinker. They're thinking about things. They don't actually have to do physical labor. So it was very symbolic of that. And then you had the Buddhist emperors who are out there helping the poor and actually getting their fingers dirty kind of thing. They're out actually doing stuff. And so they're seen as the good alternative to Confucianist emperors. So the 6 dynasties comes to an end with the Sui dynasty. The Sui dynasty is going to reinstate the exams for clerks and for government jobs that had kind of gone by the wayside during the 6 dynasties. It also will expand China through travel and trade and art. We see the development of porcelain during the Sui dynasty, and porcelain is going to be a huge trade thing for China. Their porcelain was very, very delicate, very fine. In fact, you wanted to get it to a point where you could see through it. That's how thin it was. And no one else could do it except for the Chinese. However, the Sui dynasty is going to make a couple of really big mistakes. Number one, they're going to try and expand into Korea. And Korea kicks their butt. And it's a huge embarrassment because they lost to Korea. And Korea is supposed to be like this backwater region. It's not something that they thought would happen. They thought they'd take over them no problem. Well, and then they also get rid of their emperor. They assassinate him. So that's going to leave things kind of up in the air of who's going to take over next. And so then we'll see the introduction of the Tang dynasty.